Assalamu alaikum, Sat Sri Akal, and Namaste. My name is Farheen Khan, and you're watching the Azeeza Show. So over the last several weeks, we've talked about issues that have affected women. We've talked about violence. We recently talked about the issue of Islamophobia. And now we're going to kind of shift gears and start talking about women in politics. And joining me today are some of my really dear friends, Urs here and Doly Begum. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, no, I'm actually quite excited about having this conversation. I know that you both have run or are currently running for political office, and I know that's something that I've also done. So haven't really had the chance to have a conversation like this where we'll be really real about the experience and what it's like to be women in running for office. So just to really jump right into it. So, Urs, you ran for municipal nomination, you ran for city council, and then also for the provincial nomination, right? So what was that experience like for you?
They were two different experiences, actually. So back in 2010, when I decided to run for municipal office, there were many people in the community who knew of my community work and just the amount of engagement that community work tends to lead to political, because you see the impact politics makes with various community issues. So somehow I was pushed to run, encouraged to run, and I did. I had worked on other campaigns prior to that, but to help a campaign versus running your campaign are quite different. And so the experience, I would never trade it for anything else. There was a lot of door knocking, meeting people with municipal politics. Often the responses were, neutral to good, to very good. On occasion, you'll have a negative, somebody who doesn't want to open the door. You don't take that personally. That's just election time. People don't like to open doors. And perhaps the odd time you might face, questions that might not feel comfortable. But for the most part, positive experience. And, I love meeting and talking to people and engaging in conversation. But when you're running, you definitely have to have your game face on, and always. You have to have your mindset that, the next few hours I'm out there, I'm knocking on doors, I'm meeting people. And so that's what you need to do in a municipal election. With provincial, or with nominations in general, whether it's provincial or federal, it's a little bit of a different story. I mean, you do still have to talk to members or talk to people, invite them to be members, and then have those members come out and vote.
And you ran for the Conservative Party, right?
Yes, for the PC party. So the PC is the provincial party. Conservatives are federal, and so it was a provincial nomination that I was seeking for the PC party. So the conversation is a little different. Whereas in municipal elections, you say, I'm running, my name is, I want to represent you, will you vote for me? Right. And then everyone goes on the one day to vote. And depending on how well you influence people, you get that number of people coming out to vote for you. With nominations, you go, you talk, you convince them to be a member of the party you're representing. You also convince them that you're the right person for this nomination, and there are usually others, depending on the riding, could be a few, could be more than that. And then getting them to come out to vote. When it's not really an election, it's not really election day for everyone, but it's election day for you in that riding. Right. So you need them to come out.
Yeah, no. And so maybe we can ask Doly. Doly, you just recently were nominated for Scarborough Southwest.
Yes.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
So tell us what your experience has been like, leading up to nomination and the last couple of weeks. How have it been for you?
Well, alhamdulillah, and thank you very much for having me here today. I think first, congratulations on running. Municipal experience, I think it's very difficult too. Well, this is my first time, and I'm very excited. I'm really excited because one of the things I noticed was getting the nomination was very difficult. So it was a lot of work. and not just for myself, but I also felt there's a group of people that sort of came together because they believed in me. And whether it's friends, family, a lot of community leaders who just found out and have seen my work in the community, and they sort of came together and said, you know what, we will sign up as many members. So as you mentioned, for nominations, you have to sign up members, and if there is a contested nomination, then obviously you want to make sure that you secure the vote, because that nomination day is your E-Day. So what we did was we started signing up members, and thankfully it wasn't contested, because I think obviously people found that we had the support and we didn't really need to have anyone else. Well, I mean, we could, but there was no one else who came forward, and then obviously we had hundreds of people that showed up to the nomination despite it not being a contested nomination, and I found it to be a very, very, very comforting experience, but also very energized and very encouraging. Because when you see people in the community come forward for you and tell you, and after the nomination actually, there are a few folks who came out and were in tears, and they told me that we are with you, we believe in you, and I had one gentleman, we call them uncles. Right. So one uncle came up and said, "I'm so proud of you," and he was in tears and he was so happy, and he said it looked like his daughter was up there. So that feeling was very encouraging. It also showed that if you work hard, then it is possible. Because to be honest, last February when some of the writing folks were encouraging me, I didn't think that I would be getting into politics. I love doing community work, I loved doing outreach, I loved working for a cause, for an issue that I believed in, which is what I've been doing in Scarborough, in Toronto, whether it's municipal politics or provincial. I'm sure I used to work on the Keep Hydro Public campaign. Yes. So when I organized that campaign province-wide, I had the opportunity to go around the province, talk to so many people, talk about issues that really affects them, like electricity rates, which was huge because people were trying to figure out whether they should pay for their electricity or food. But I never really thought that I'm going to actually take this further and run for office. But it happened, and I think, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
So interestingly enough, I think, one of the things that sort of, because I ran federally, right? And one of the things that kind of, I remember when I was running or when I was asked to run, it was interesting because people had, recommended that I run, and I never thought I would run in politics. I've always been very critical of the process, really want to hold our leaders accountable and stuff like that. And so, moving into that political sort of realm was really new to me. And I remember having conversations with a lot of people, our new leader for the federal NDP, Jagmeet Singh. I had, conversations with Nathan Sean, City Council in Toronto, and a number of other sort of racialized candidates and individuals that were elected to say, Asma Malik, for example, right? School board trustee, so who's running for City Council now. So I had a chance to kind of have a conversation with them and say, look, does it really make sense to run for political office when you're a racialized person? Are you very tokenized, or is there actually room to make change happen, right? And I'm really glad I had those conversations at the time, because I think that was really helpful to help me kind of get to that point, right? So I know that I've had some real interesting kind of experiences and challenges over time, which I'd love to kind of share as well. But I want to hear from both of you. What were some of those kind of interesting moments, or some of the challenges perhaps that you faced, or is there something different that you've kind of, come to realize when you're running for office now?
Well, I was just going to say, in terms of tokenized, there are times I question that, and I think last year when we're having these conversations amongst family members, thinking whether I should run or not, I didn't want to be that token. And I don't think any of us, especially because we have so many different layers of barriers that we have, but we are also fighting, and that sometimes seems like the reason why you get asked, being a woman of color, and I never wanted to be running for that cause, for that reason. However, I felt like later on, when trying to get that nomination, that became a barrier. It was because for example, you're a woman of color, it's harder for you. So I think it became the exact opposite. Rather than being the token and having an easier path, it was the exact opposite.
It's still quite,
And what's worse is you can't even have that conversation sometimes because people will say, well, no, you have it so easy because we have such quotas, we have it. They have the writing, for example, or the search committee has to have somebody who's
it's from a diverse community, right?
Yeah, but I think sometimes it becomes difficult because you'll have certain questions asked and certain barriers that you have to break.
What do you think, Chris? How was your?
Yeah, I think generally, there is a push towards having women of color, having a diverse-looking caucus or representatives when it comes to candidates. That's always going to be the case. But in politics, I think men generally have it easier than women. So while, those are all pluses for us, it doesn't necessarily, as you mentioned, make it easier. The path is not easy for a woman of color, for someone who, looks diverse. So whereas religious garment, hijab, turban, maybe. So those are obstacles that I think women of racialized backgrounds, cultures, diversity, I think will continue to face. And some of those are faced within our own communities. We're not saying outside.
No, of course, it's both.
There is definitely
absolutely.
the outside culture, but within our own communities, and especially when you're South Asian, a Muslim, there are certain roles that are expected for women to play versus men. And, generally it's not, while some may say, it's good for our women to come out, but, when it comes down to actually supporting women out there, having them speak at the mosque pulpit, having them speak in front of an audience, there's always a hesitation.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because we've got the gender segregation. So yeah, those are definite barriers that women of color obviously face.
Yeah, for sure. Oh.
I was going to add responsibilities. That's a huge one. I know for you, for example, your family was very important. And for me, I think I had to go back and forth so many times because we have responsibilities like paying bills at home, and you have to take time off, and you're actually contributing financially to the family. So that's a huge decision that there is no one else that can take that responsibility for you. And for me personally, my brother and I sort of took on that parental role for my family. So it was really hard for me to decide whether I should or not. Not whether I want to or not. It's whether this is something that I could. This is something even feasible for me.
Right. Exactly. No, for sure. I mean, and that's the thing, right? Those are very real challenges that we have to go through when we make that decision. And like you said, it was like around the piece around the mosques, for example, right? It's hard because not everybody. We're trailblazing in many ways, right? It's not usual for women to stand in front of the pulpit on at Friday prayers in front of a bunch of men and talk about why they should vote, right?
And I don't want to broad stroke everyone.
No, for
There's
sure.
a lot of masjids and mosques, and they're actually really trying to be forward thinking. And the fact that we have some representation already, like Salma Zahid and the Liberal Party, there's Ikra Khalid. I think, that has also opened up their minds too, that, we need to allow women in our community to be able to sit and represent, community and be a representative of community.
I think certainly there's still a long way to go, but we've made some progress, which is nice. Why don't we take a quick break and then we can continue the conversation. We'll be back. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Azeeza Show. My name is Farheen Khan and we're speaking to our guest Urs here and Doly Begum about women in politics and how it's been to run or previously run and currently be running. and it's like we were just talking about. I mean, certainly, there's the challenges sort of outside of the community, or and then there's those sort of challenges that we have within the community, and there's two very distinct sort of challenges, I think, right? One of the things I wanted to kind of share was, when I think. When I ran, I specifically ran because our Prime Minister at the time was being very anti-Muslim, and that anti-Muslim sentiment was a problem. And I saw it as sort of an extension to my social justice work around anti-Islamophobia and stuff like that. So running as a hijab-wearing woman across Canada, and being kind of in the media and stuff like that, there were a lot of really interesting sort of things that I experienced. And so I know that. I guess the one thing I wanted to say was that, when I ran, like, there was this very broad sort of narrative that was being pushed through the media, right? That was saying like, oh, all Canadians hate Muslims, right? This is the problem. Everybody hates Muslims. And I was really trying my best to not, feed into that narrative and actually say, no, actually, that's not the case. So when I ran, there was a lot of media channels that were like following me, at the doors, and TV channels and this and that. They're like, what's the experience of the Canadian people, right? When they see you at the doors, right? And in the moment the experience was positive, they wouldn't air the story, right? And that was the big thing for me, was like, well, why not? Like, this is real. This is not about, let's be honest, right? But unfortunately, that was my experience. And there was a lot of want to provoke people, right? Like for me especially, like the kinds of questions that I was asked. I think the worst question I was ever asked on live radio was, how does it feel being the next virus people are afraid they're gonna catch, right? And, it's just like, you really have to have a thick skin when dealing with the media, because it's like, well, you just take one, you make one sort of comment and it's taken out of context, right? So just wanted to kind of share that with you. So what has your experience been like with the media? What have, I know, Urs, you've also had your own TV show as well. So it's been interesting to, like, for me, it's very interesting now that I'm on the other side, I'm trying to be an ally, right? And so, what was the media like for both of you when you were running?
I don't think I've really faced negatives when it came to media. I think, for the most part, I present myself as another Canadian who's trying to run and represent the voice of the people in wherever you're running. Mm-hmm. And that usually is taken well. Sometimes there is media that, is looking to undermine you, and you just answer the best you can and hope for the best. And, I think with media, we know that anything you say, you start going on in a long banter, then they're going to pick things. There's going to be more to pick on. Right. And, those things can be misconstrued in media. Part of media training is you just try to keep it brief, and then there's less for them to play with, if they're looking to give you a negative angle. I think for the most part, reporting is fair, but you have to have those answers. Like when you said that they asked you about the virus, I don't know if I would have ever had a quick comeback for that. Right. So you have to have comebacks. You have to be prepared. You have to have your Cole's notes on, all the negative questions that could be asked, and have an answer for that. And, I think oftentimes people are not prepared for that, but, you can't expect all the questions to be, oh, it's so great that you're running, and how's the experience and this, and, it's news. Media wants to make money, right? Sure. So they're trying to find different angles to poke at, and we see that all the time in media. It happens.
My answer is probably not the most media friendly, because I've had friendly experience, but I would hope that the media picks up more stories. I'm in Scarborough Southwest, and I know local media is very important there for the different communities, and so far they've been very friendly. Okay. But I do notice that especially with mainstream media, it's either, if it's a story about, Muslim women, South Asian women, for example, or some struggle or something about Islamophobia, then it's probably interesting for them to report. But if I say that I actually had, a huge room full of people, people of all backgrounds, people of all colors showed up, and I had my fundraising pitch was done by a gay white man. I'm talking about Fred Han, who is one of I think the first gay man to be the president of QP Ontario. And he was talking to a room full of Muslim men, as well as Hindu, as well as Christian, as well as some non-practicing residents. And they were all very welcoming. So it was an incredible experience. And right before that, I had Nathan Shan talking about how he felt that I was running. So that I had an incredible experience. And I think if we actually look at it from a positive lens, we can actually bring something much bigger out of it, because we have so much potential. And if we don't give that opportunity, and if the media doesn't cover it, then we're just never going to find out about it.
No, for sure.
I think even when negative questions are asked, you have to try to find a way to spin it so that whatever positive you're trying to showcase, look at the diversity of the people in the room. Look at
what you want
exactly.
To say,
you still
sure.
have to try to insert your plug.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions. I remember, not even just in the media, but when I was going to town halls and other places where people would ask you questions. And it was one of those things where now I've given some feedback to the party as well to say sometimes it's good to have racialized candidates run, but then you also need to equip them with the right messaging, right? Because sometimes we'll be asked questions that are completely not related to the party or the policy book at all, right? It's I'll give you an example. I remember going to this really, this seniors home where they, where these individuals had sort of reached out and said, here, come and talk to us, introduce yourself. And somebody in the audience stood up and said, well, if you get elected, will you impose Sharia law in Canada? And I was like, wow, right? No. But before I could even say anything, people in the audience stood up and were like, what kind of question is that? They were getting mad at him, right? And so I was just I said to him, sir, I'm running for federal politics, right? I was born and raised in Canada. I follow the Canadian system. Why would you feel that that's something that I would do, right? Not even getting into, whether or not, anything beyond that, just being able to be clear with him. But stuff like that, right? Or questions very specific on particular issues, right? The Palestinian-Israeli conflict. What are your thoughts on this, right? Things that people, or the, the infamous sex education curriculum, right? And the changes to that. People always had questions that were just, far beyond what the policy platforms were at the time. And so,
this is a problem, and probably the reason why we need to have more of these kind of shows. People in general don't know the difference between municipal, provincial, and federal politics. They don't understand who's responsible for what and what the different areas that are covered within provincial politics, within federal politics, within municipal politics. So we need to have these conversations. Kids go through their civic class in grade 5 and they learn, which is such a huge plus. But because a lot of people within our community, the Muslim community, South Asian communities, they haven't gone through that schooling. They don't really understand that difference, and therefore they don't understand the value of civic engagement, which is the reason why you're running, you've run, I've run, because we feel passionate about community issues, and we understand that it's through our civic engagement that we will be able to address whatever challenges there are. Those challenges may not affect us directly, or you may not think they do. They do. Every level of government affects us all as individuals. But if that isn't motivating enough for you to, do your basic, and go out and vote, because that's really the biggest issue within many of the communities. Think about your kids who are growing up here, who are going to school here. Think about the issues that they're going to face. If we don't have voices, then your kids will not have the rights that they should have going forward. So, you know, and there's lots of issues around women, around children, around our seniors, around healthcare, around education, that need us to go out and vote for the right candidates.
Well, I actually think, people, especially like the immigrant communities and, you know, the elderly here, I think they are politically involved in different sense, and I like to think that they're very intelligent people. I think our voters are very intelligent people. I don't want to. I also think that it's how able they are to go out and spend that time. We're talking about parents, family members who are here to earn a living. They're working sometimes like waking up at 5 a.m. I know, like when I moved here, I was very young, and I saw my dad waking up at like 5 a.m. in the morning, and then getting ready, going to work, and then he would come home around like 9 p.m. or so. That's a really long day, and then he would do the same thing over and over for, you know, as long as he could work. And that, like, how is that? You can't be engaged in the community. There is no civic engagement because he's unable to do that. And I know that's the case for a lot of our folks, because they just don't have the time. And when they do, that little time they want to spend with their family. So it's, if our governments, for example, are making it easier for our families, they're providing, you know, the income necessary, for example, like minimum wage. If there are a lot of jobs available, so they don't have to do precarious jobs, they don't have to do 2-3 part-time jobs.
Right?
Exactly. If there is affordable childcare, if there is, you know, if a mom, for example, doesn't have to worry what's happening at home while she's working and then run back home, or if there is good transit, so she doesn't have to actually take 3 buses to get to work.
Right.
So all these things make up for how able people are to be able to spend that time to be, you know, involved in the community, and then, you know, make sure they're actually having an informed decision about voting.
Yeah.
So before I want to be able to kind of be mindful of how our parents, our family members are.
There's definitely that segment. There's also a large segment that doesn't care. That's the
apathy
segment
of the voters.
That's the segment I'm worried about.
Yeah.
You know, the housewives that are at home watching
Which we can
GOTV.
encourage. I
For
like,
sure.
I respectfully disagree, because I think we can encourage them. I'm noticing that because I'm running, I have a lot of aunties, for example, who would never get involved in politics, but they are, because now they see a reflection of them in there.
For sure, and that's where we need to move the community. And they're moving. People are moving, but you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And they're still, yeah.
Yeah, we still have
And that's how
some
this
work to
show
do.
will hopefully educate
Educate
those
people? Yeah.
viewers
Yeah.
to
Let's hope
be
so.
really motivated to go
Same
out and vote.
with the
Right.
young women, for example, and boys and girls. And I mean, if you know, we are the role models, and they grow up seeing somebody who looks like them in politics, they'll say, "Oh, okay, so I have a chance as well." And I hope that, you know, next term, for example, next election, we have tons of women running. We have tons of women of color running. We have tons of Muslim women running. And that's something that we can do by showing them the path, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is, yeah, I hear you. I think it's so important to have women, and particularly women of color, running. You know, yes, there's, like we've talked about, there's so many added barriers to running. You know, whether it's within the community or outside the community, whether it's when we're dealing with media or generally, you know, people who quite possibly could be just very ignorant, right, and are just not aware and are asking questions in what could seem a very insensitive, you know, way to us. But, you know, there's a lot of sort of, you know, I think we've made some headway, right?
For sure, and we just need to continue to represent community, empower community, inform community, show that leadership, show that representation, encourage others to step up and become leaders. And you know, when we have more people that are active, involved, representing, then that motivates more people. And you know, we'll eventually get to where we need to be. And you know, I think we've already moved a far way compared to where we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. So you know, I think we just keep plugging at it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to give some advice to, like, I know, when people talk to me and say, Farheen, I'm thinking of running, like, I'll lay it out for them and say, like, this is what it's been like, this is what you need to think about, these are all the things, anything from like your financial sort of situation to the kind of commitment that you're dealing with, and then all the way to, what you can expect when you're actually at the doors. What advice would you give to individuals that are looking to kind of, or even considering running?
I would like to say, like, you should have some experience. It shouldn't be, you've seen somebody, you want to, you took a couple of pictures and you want to run. It should be, you got involved, you've worked with somebody, you have some experience, you understand the entirety of what's involved when it comes to running, and you make the choice, consult community, consult your family. If you don't have your family on board, it's going to be difficult. If you don't have community on board, it's going to be difficult. If you haven't worked with anyone, nobody knows you, that's going to be difficult. So be involved. You don't know what the future holds. If you decide that it's time, you're financially secure, you're in the right place, the opportunity's great, then, go ahead, say Bismillah and run.
That's good.
I absolutely agree. I wouldn't have thought about it if I didn't have that community experience. And I was working at City Hall for a while, and I did provincial politics for a while. So it was, it was one of those that I felt more comfortable with.
Right.
And obviously, because of provincial politics and the things that I was more involved with, like healthcare, hydro, I thought, well, this is something that I know and I could do, and I could do a much better than what's happening right now. So that was my kind of reasoning for it, and my advice would be to tell them to actually move forward, run. I think until you're a candidate, you won't know how it feels. So gain that experience, that community experience. Try to work wherever you can that actually kind of links you close to the political world, to the issues, and then run. And work hard to get the nomination, get the support, because until you walk through that path and find out how difficult it is, you won't know how to tackle that. You won't know how to break those barriers.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And to the audience, you've heard that here today, running is essential. Being civically engaged is essential. We want to have more women candidates. We want to have more racialized candidates running. Look inside yourself, really think about, if you're interested in running, why it is that you want to run, what change you want to make in society, and then really think about how you can get involved. So until next week, we'll see you then. Take care.